Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome to our fourth session in the second part of our White Sail seminar. And tonight we're going to talk about the bardos, the transitional states. We're going to begin a discussion on the yogas. And particularly actually here to begin with, we're going to be discussing what is known as the kayas. So that's going to be our topics tonight. And this is the last chapter in the book. It's quite long, and it's also possibly a little bit dense in the sense there's a lot of material, and some of it might require that we go slowly through it. So I've decided that we should spend the last three sessions on that. So while briefly lent this precious human body's white sail, pushed by clean intentions, gentle wind, without turning back towards miserable samsaric deserts and making the error of missing this chance, try to receive virtue's jewels by crossing the waves of ocean mind to the serene continent of the triple gems, since doing this is more meaningful than anything else. So we begin with a quote from Saraha. If you realize your own wisdom mind, that is all. Nobody knows anything other than that. So in terms of our practice of the path and the objective of enlightenment, it is to unveil the ground nature of the mind. And apart from that, we're not doing anything else. Apart from that, in terms of enlightenment, there's nothing else to be known. So knowing this nature, this undeceived, unconfused, undiluted, innate ground, that is what we're doing, and this is what needs to be known. So first we have a discussion of the three kayas, and again we're discussing this wisdom mind. But when this wisdom mind is not known, we then have the delusion of samsara. So relative to being confused or not confused, we then have these pure and impure conditions. And as far as the wisdom mind goes, it's not just a blank. It has infinite qualities and it manifests. There's nothing not included in the three kayas. So in that way we discuss the three kayas, or rather we discuss this ground nature in terms of three kayas. The three aspects, the three dimensions of the awakened mind. And when this is not properly understood, then we have these three aspects in the impure versions. So it really just depends on whether or not we are awake, whether or not we have the optics, we're wearing the sort of shades of delusion, or whether we take them off. But you could say the objects, the nature of what is being perceived and so forth are the same. So the qualities or defects of respectively enlightenment and confusion is then what we first want to hone in on now in this discussion. And so eliminating delusion, we unveil the three kayas. So in attaining enlightenment, we're unveiling some abiding aspects of awakening, which are then the three kayas of Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Niyamanakaya. So when we speak about the permanence of the three kayas, this is not some substantial dualistic permanence. We need to understand that the nature of this reality is beyond time and space. So when we say permanence, it's just that it's indestructible, but it's not something that is like lasting in terms of the three times. The manifest aspects of Niyamanakaya and Sambhogakaya are indivisible from you could say, the non-manifest aspect or emptiness aspect of the Dharmakaya. So in terms of the Mahayana teachings, we would, for example, in the Buddha nature teachings, in the Uttara Tantra and so forth, we sometimes refer to the three kayas as the three permanences. And of course, as well-trained Buddhists, we might object and say, hey, this is not possible. Nothing is truly permanent. We don't believe in something substantial or a Godhead, all of that. So that's not what's meant here. We're just merely speaking of how enlightenment manifests. It's not just a blank nothing. And so we understand enlightenment in terms of its aspect of the non-delusion of Dharmakaya, and manifesting within that all the qualities, the countless qualities, the blissful aspect of the Sambhogakaya, you could say the beauty, and furthermore, manifesting within all the experience of our perceived realm and so forth, in indescribable, uncertain ways, are then the Nirmanakaya. So, in the from the pure aspect, then we have these three kayas, and from the impure aspect, we have samsara. So, in general, Dharmakaya, and this is of course just something we need to be clear on, this is sometimes referred to as emptiness. But we need to understand emptiness is really just an antidote to our habitual pattern of grasping onto phenomena. And as long as we have this delusion of objectifying phenomena, we need to know that they are, in fact, there's nothing there. This is empty. But knowing or not knowing that in terms of the subject is having wisdom or not having wisdom, being deluded or not being deluded. So we could say this realization of emptiness is what we call the lack of delusion. It's being awake. And that is the objective of all Buddhist teachings on wisdom. So we could say the Mahayana practice, then we have the teachings on the Vipassana, while in the Vajrayana practice we more speak about Dzogchen, Mahamudra. And in the Nyingma tradition, this Dharmakaya nature is represented iconographically then by the naked Buddha Samantabhadra. Sambhogakaya is then the manifestation of the infinite qualities that arise out of this awakened state. And in the Mahayana, we very often see in the sutras that the Sambhogakaya is said to arise by the prayers of the Bodhisattvas. However, in the Vajrayana, we say that these qualities are actually spontaneously present already now. This is the spontaneous presence of what we call deity. And so iconographically, the Sambhogakaya is then represented by the ornamented Buddhas, Vajrasattva, the Buddhas of the five families, the 100 and peaceful wrathful deities, and so on. The Nirmanakaya is we refer to it as compassion, but we could more say it's the goodness or the display that spontaneously manifests. And when it's recognized, you could say it's the display of pure realms. When it's not recognized, this is then the realms of samsara. But in its pure aspect, then, the Nirmanakaya, this is where the Buddha manifests in order to teach sentient beings. So, iconographically, this is then represented as the Buddha Shakyamuni, you could say in the sutra context, what we call the dispassionate or desireless manifestation. Or we also have yogic manifestations, for example, Padmasambhava and the various teachers. This is just how the Buddhas will manifest to sentient beings. So Thinley Norbu also mentions, and also this we find in the sutras, that this Nirmanakaya can also manifest in terms of just objects like bridges or cooling wind on a hot summer day and so forth. So this is just a little bit about these three kayas. But it's something that we very often see, and it's almost, when we say the three kayas, it's almost synonymous with what we would call wisdom or awareness and so forth. So we always understand that this wisdom nature that is the object of what we are attempting to realize, this is understood in terms of these three aspects. So they're very important. They are going to be talked about again and again. By the way, we started a bit late, and not only that, but I was going to make a point. I'm probably going to have to go a little bit over time today, so extra apologies for any kind of inconvenience that this might cause. The essential permanence of Dharmakaya is like the sky. The continuous permanence of Sambhogakaya is its wisdom qualities. The indefinite permanence of the Niyamanakaya benefits beings according to their individual dispositions. So the Dharmakaya is great emptiness, which is untouched, it's unobscured, and it is then what Rinpoche here refers to as the essential permanence of Dharmakaya. It's like the sky. But within such a sky, then the wisdom qualities, they manifest as unobscured spontaneity. And that is what we then refer to as the continuous permanence of Sambhogakaya. These are the qualities that manifest in the Dharmakaya. And again, this nature manifests in terms of the perceptions of subject and object. You could say the Sambhogakaya doesn't exist in dualistic terms. It exists in very subtle dualistic terms, but more according to ordinary sentient beings' perceptions of duality than the perceptions of the Niyamanakaya realm manifests to benefit sentient beings. So these manifestations may be pure or impure depending on the beings to be benefited. And you could say their appearances, this is Sambhogakaya. So the appearances of the Sambhogakaya is definite in terms of there's a definite teacher, there's a definite teaching, there's a definite place, retinue, time, and so forth. Yet how these manifests, this is indefinite, and it completely depends according to the sentient beings. So the way that enlightenment manifests has, you could say, an unchanging quality, but according to the beings that are being taught, then it might manifest in various forms. And this variegated forms is then what we call the indefinite permanence of the Niyamanakaya. We need to understand when we then speak about Dharmakaya, which is basically a way of saying enlightenment. This is not some absolute nothingness. It's the non-delusion, which is the ground of pure wisdom phenomena. So for the sentient being who's deluded, we don't have Dharmakaya, but for the Buddha that's awakened, we speak of that as the Buddha's Dharmakaya. So that, of course, is our absolute nature, but as long as it's not realized, then we don't see it. Once it's seen, then this is the ground of all pure wisdom phenomena. So the Dharmakaya is also referred to as emptiness. Again, this is not some objective emptiness in the sense that there's a void. It doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It just means that whatever appears cannot be objectified and held. So it doesn't mean that there's an objective emptiness, and it's also not emptiness as some sort of conceptual absolute. You know, people will sometimes say, I believe in nothing. And that's really a strong belief. And that's what we would call an extreme, or it's essentially dogma. And this is very, very common and lies at the heart of what Thinley Norbu Rinpoche in this work very often is refuting as nihilism. So we need to have this understanding of the ground nature, but of course, in their unobscured condition, these three kayas, they manifest in terms of unconsciousness. Dharmakaya is the deep sleep, beyond tangible and intangible. Sambhogakaya is the subtle appearances of dreams. So these are more tangible. And the Niyamanakaya are then the gross appearances of our waking state, what we then call when we are awake. So these are the ways in which these three kayas manifest when they're not recognized. So not recognize the three kayas are impure, recognize they're pure. Likewise, so us not recognizing, we're sentient beings that are experiencing the impure three kayas. So you could say our nature is the same as the Buddha's, but it's perverted. It's just not understood properly. Through recognizing, sentient beings are liberated into the pure three kayas. So once we recognize, then we're no longer caught in the dualistic trap, and the impure three kayas are seen in their natural condition. With knowledge of our Buddha nature, we are motivated to practice. We transform the three impure kayas into the pure kayas. So the knowledge that we bring to the path gives us motivation. We could just practice on the basis of blind faith, but as much as the more we actually understand what we possess in terms of our potential, to that extent we're much more motivated to practice. And once we then pursue practice, what we're doing is transforming the impure into pure. We're not actually changing anything in terms of the nature of things, but we're changing the way that we see things. But this actually, this could be challenged when we, particularly then in a modern context, as many people, even Buddhists, say, would sort of just use Buddhism as some sort of gimmick for just having a meaningful life, then they might underlying have this assumption that once we're dead, then that's kind of it. And that belief in nothingness, this really obscures our appreciation for what we truly are. It obscures the dimension of the intangible potential for enlightenment. And so that can get in the way, and we won't properly understand what our Buddha nature is about. Again, Rinpoche underlines that the objective of the Buddhist path is to awaken this ordinary mind, our ground nature, and transform these impure kayas into the pure kayas. So that's what we're doing. We're transforming this delusional condition into awakening. Now, this dividing line between recognizing and not recognizing, this is where samsara begins. So to have some understanding of our condition, of course, as practitioners of meditation, we're continually confronted with this. We're continually confronted with what it means to be distracted, to fall into dualistic distraction and pursuing our conceptual structures, how that augments kleshas and karma. And this is very important because this informs us about what our given conditions are. This dualistic mind, and we've already established that this is, you could say, continuous. In the case of the enlightened mind, it is, you could say, not objectifiable in any way. It's not belonging to time and space. But at the same time, as long as we are wandering in delusion, because it's not tangible and there's nothing material about it, there's actually nothing that stops it. And so it's also not limited to the physical body. But that dualistic mind then, that you could say that is the primary nature of our entire experience, this is basic to samsara. And yet, there's 5 conditions that we experience in our ordinary state where this dualistic mind just is unconscious. And these then are generally sort of unconscious states that appear, and yet it's not as if these are states of particular profundity. So we might think that, oh yeah, if we just go into some sort of dull state where we have no perceptions, that might be nirvana, that might be it, or that's some sort of spiritual dimension. And that's where we need to be quite discerning. So we speak about the dullness of the neutralized extremes, goknyom. Then we have just when we're intoxicated. Then there's entering into a state of, essentially it's like samadhi. And this is such a nyomjuk. I'm going to have to be guilty here of there's a place. This either means when you're in a state of deep samadhi, or the state of sexual union. So it's one of these two. The Tibetan word is unfortunately the same, strangely enough, but anyway. Then there's deep sleep. I'll get back to you on that one. Then there's deep sleep, and then there's finally when we faint. So these 5 moments where we don't have dualistic mind, these are really just states where the mind just isn't functioning, but the potential for samsara is still there. So, if we're distracted from pure awareness, any activity is indifferent stupa. Without recognizing clarity, we don't see properly. So it applies that when we're not in a state of presence, in a pure, non-deluded state, then anything that we're doing actually creates further samsara. So we're essentially blind at that time. So when we are engaged with objects, it doesn't really matter whether we are peaceful or neutral, it's still dualistic minds, it's not awareness. If we are unfocused and not present in terms of wisdom, then any activity is indifferent stupa, and also any activity is then the cause of samsara. Thinley Norbu says, as long as we are not awakened in a state of stainless primordial purity, we are limited to our ordinary dualistic mind, which is always the cause of indifferent stupa. So indifferent stupa doesn't recognize mind's clarity, so we don't see properly the distinct qualities of phenomena. It's like viewing in a dark room. So essentially we're stumbling around as long as we don't recognize wisdom mind. So in our indifferent stupa, we create ignorant patterns. We remain unconscious about our actions, their effects, and what could be helpful. Although we are habitually numb, the Buddha's path then can eliminate this dullness and awaken stainless clarity, which is then why we practice the path. So we have the ground of the stupa, which then is ignorance itself, and out of that it arises the patterns of kleshas and karma. As long as we're in this state of non-recognition, we are essentially acting unconsciously, and so we don't really understand the implications of what we're doing, and we continuously mistake what is going to be helpful for us and what isn't. So also we have countless lifetimes where we're just oblivious to cause and effect and what creates our experiences. So we're used to remaining in this comfortable oblivion. Now, if we examine, we'll see how this dullness causes the deluded ignorance of samsara. And that's what we do through the study, and also on the path of meditation, we gradually increase our understanding of what really governs us. And then the path, then, the Buddha taught, is about eliminating this dullness and awakening into stainless clarity. So these are the very premises of the path. And now we're getting a bit more specific. And here, Thinley Norbu then begins to introduce us to the concept of bardo, or intermediate states. The bardo is the space of actual reality, dhammata. When it's recognized, it is wisdom display. When mistaken, it is samsara. So generally, you could say our common discourse around bardo makes people believe that this is something to do when you die. They'll say, oh yeah, when you're in the bardo and so on. But it actually refers to anything within the flux of conditioned phenomena, which, if it's embraced by the ground of unchanging wisdom, then this is recognized as the display of wisdom, actual reality. So that's dhammata, reality itself. In the case of dualistic mind that doesn't recognize this unchanging ground awareness, these bardos then become the phenomena of the six realms. So we have four or six of these bardos, or transitional states. So the first four are life, what we call the natural bardo between birth and death. Then there's the bardo of the moment of death, dying. Dhammata, the bardo of actual reality. And then the bardo of becoming or seeking rebirth. So these are four, but you can also sometimes add an additional two, which some systems do, which is refer to dream as a bardo, and also refer to meditation as a bardo. So these four are the general, and also adding two, we have six. So the Vajrayana is all about integrating the bardos, or transitional states. Don't think that if we're introducing six bardos, we're introducing some new material. This is just a, how do you say, a different perspective And all we're speaking about here is just how the immediate experience that we have right now is not something that exists in terms of something solid. It's groundless. Everything is in flux. And from that point of view, we can refer to everything as Bardo. So in fact, all of reality is Bardo. So it's just a way of defining how our different experiences of existences and so forth can be understood. And what's implicit in Bardo is also that this is a moment where we could constantly awaken. There's always this possibility, because everything is in flux, nothing is solid, there's always the possibility of recognizing this ground nature. So we say Buddhas have no transitional states, no bardos, while sentient beings, they mistake this dharmata, or actual reality, and they wander in the transitional states of samsara. So that's the dividing line. The seeds of the obscuring passions can be purified then through study and practice. So what drives us through the bardos and ignorance, this is something that we are onto in terms of investigating, analyzing through the Buddha's teaching, and also through our own experience of practice. So particularly the purifying practices include the practice of sadhana, which then require guidance. We'd want to practice the Vajrayana methods, which then constitute, which are then the practice of sadhana. So this is something where we would want to clarify the meaning with our teacher. So presently, since we are within the Vajrayana context, then when we speak about study and practice, then practice implicitly refers then to the, you can say, the higher Vajrayana practice, the path of sadhana. Any questions? No questions? Oh, okay. If not, you have one more chance before we finish. Now, Thinley Norbu Rinpoche here, he then speaks about the further aspects in terms of us practicing. So we understand the given situation with confusion and non-confusion, what drives the dimensions of enlightenment and the dimensions of confusion, samsara. So what is the dividing line between that? This is what we're on to here, and what we established initially is then the objective of enlightenment is not just a blank condition, but it possesses these qualities and also this compassionate display. So the nature of enlightenment and the pure realms of the three kayas is, you could say, the understanding that we bring to our understanding of what is the ground, what is our given conditions. And then we've established then how we can recognize and not recognize, and what this in fact constitutes, this dualistic clinging, and the necessity for us to recognize this ground. So with that understanding, we then venture into the journey of our practice, which takes place within a context of these bardos. We are always in a bardo, and this is where we need to then recognize within these bardos. And this is then where Rinpoche then explains how we would want to pursue the practice of sadhana. So in general, when we speak about sadhana, we talk about, in the Vajrayana sadhana or Vajrayana practice, we talk about two stages. One corresponds to the tangible perceptions that we have, our experience of person and realm and so forth, which is the visualization stage. And the second is the completion stage. So that corresponds then to the you could say subtle or intangible aspects. And as far as the completion stage goes, we have these 6 yogas, which are aspects of practicing the completion stage. We're going to go into that, but initially just Rinpoche, he enumerates how the completion stage has these two aspects, which is one is with characteristics, and that's where we very often have these yoga practices. Yoga is where we think in terms of chakras, nadi, prana, bindu, all these kind of things. And then we also have without characteristics, which are then practices without reference points, such as Mahamudra and the Mahati, or the Great Perfection. So the let's see here. We would say that any life that we have, given where we are right now, whatever kind of sentient beings we are, this is the result of karmic seeds. And also the duration of that life has to do with, is the result of karmic seeds. Human rebirth, among the various kinds of lives we can have, the human rebirth, as many will know, is an extraordinary opportunity that provides the optimal conditions for enlightenment. As far as then what we have in terms of the path, what the Buddha taught, then when we have the various teachings, then the purpose of the arts and sciences is to bring others to enlightenment. So as much as we have the Buddhist teaching with all its various, you could say, sophisticated aspects and so on, things like arts, sciences, and so forth, that certainly in Buddhist cultures very often occupy a very prominent role, they're rather secondary, and they're really just skillful means in order to enable us to bring others to enlightenment. So you could say the education, the logic, and the refinement that some Buddhist teachers might have, they are really just, you could say, devices that enable them to, you could say, master language and communicate and so forth. For example, some Buddhist teachers who come to the West are extremely skillful in terms of understanding and in terms of communicating to the Western mindset and so forth. So even though you could say language is secondary, the purpose of all such a grasp of the arts and sciences, this is skillful means that could bring others to enlightenment. However, if these you could say secondary arts and so on, if they become the main point, then you could say that kind of intellectualism really just hinders enlightenment. Learning on the premises of our ego leaves us self-righteous and impenetrable. Learning needs to be linked with practice and sublime teachers. Without our experience, our Dharma knowledge will be meaningless. So if we just have knowledge that's linked up in order to create further credentials, then we'll just be caught up in a cycle around our self-consciousness and self-involvement, and we'll be unable to perceive the qualities of sublime beings and their teachings. With self-righteous egos, we're like rocks in like a proud rock mountain, but also like if you have pebbles you leave in the water, they also aren't soaked. So that kind of impenetrability renders us, you could say, incapable of actually learning anything. The essence of learning is being aware of our habits in order to change them. So once we have an awareness of how we are, then we know what we're doing. Without the deeper learning or practice, we may misunderstand intellectual learning. So we could just trivialize the study of the Dharma. We could end up creating confusion rather than dispelling it. We could create further credentials as being knowledgeable in the Buddhist teaching without actually doing something that you could say dissolves or remedies the situation of our ego. And that's where we need to be inspired by and receive guidance by sublime beings. And we should understand that all learning is all about dissolving these habitual patterns. We might want to talk to others about, we might want to talk about practice rather than do it. But the much as we know about Dharma intellectually, just speaking a lot about Dharma won't actually make sense, particularly not to non-practitioners. So even though we have a lot to say, if we haven't actually made experience of it, then as far as people who are not Buddhists and who can't really use that trivial information we might have, for the others, they'll just look at an ordinary person and will not in any way be, you would say, impressed. So it's essential that before we get involved in benefiting others, that we first enable or allow the Dharma to settle in our own experience, our own hearts. Otherwise, we just objectify knowledge, become superficial, and we don't gain any deep experience. So without experience, any amount of knowledge becomes essenceless. So you see here there's a big difference between the objectivist science and the general emphasis on information that we very often have in Western learning, and here in the context of the Dharma where it's about experience and realization. So as far as the Dharma goes, we need to practice it on Dharma's own terms. And one should undertake practice to really be knowledgeable. So we have to revise our understanding of what knowledge means. Ordinary ideas, they only benefit us in a short range, and acquiring Buddhist knowledge with a limited view might even cause negativity. Thinley Norbu quotes Paltru Rinpoche, who calls it relying on Dharma and then making the bad karma of non-Dharma. So we might set out ostensibly pursuing the study of the Dharma and end up actually just creating non-Dharma through our narrow perspective and agendas. So to avoid this, we should read the life stories of the sublime masters and saints of the past, and this will inspire us to commit to subduing our ego and increasing boundless wisdom. So in general, we often think that we need to study so we become knowledgeable people, but one rarely hears that one should practice to become knowledgeable. And yet, we find in the sutras, whoever knows Dharma, yet does not know practice, is like those who can hear and see water but cannot drink it or quench their thirst. So just having an intellectual understanding is not going to do it for us. There's a quote from Longchenpa that goes, "Since knowledge is like countless stars in the sky, the study of ideas is never exhausted. So in this life, it's better to realize the profound nature, the essential meaning of Dharmakaya." So we need to be clear on what's the priority. We can study in order to have a clear idea, and also it can give us conviction. We can have a rational understanding of the validity of the Dharma, but then to actually experience the Dharma, we need to have proper experience through meditation. So when we engage in the path, then we need to have certainty and to be free of hesitation when the time comes. So the transitional states or bardos that we go through, in fact this means life right now, with its sub-bardos, if you like, of the dream when we fall asleep at night, and also in meditation. When we're in these transitional states of bardos, we need to have no hesitation about how the teaching applies to us. And in the Dzogchen teaching, they say we should be just like a swallow entering its nest. A swallow sort of is incredibly quick in entering into its nest. So we can achieve this kind of certainty initially through studying, analyzing critically, resolving our doubts with the teacher, and then we can apply this insight that we have through the practice of meditation and integrating then in ordinary life. So that will give us complete confidence, and that's where we then could have the kind of confidence where when the time comes, i.e. when we die, we have certainty. So as far as the practice goes, Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says we shouldn't worry about Vajrayana. If we use the good fortune that we presently have in this life, and that we could actually arrive at some certainty about the nature of the reality, then this will help us throughout the various bardos that we experience. And then as we apply the methods, we might be held back if somebody says, oh, the Vajrayana is very dangerous. But that's really just that the scope of the Vajrayana is daring in terms of it being immediate in our experience. It's very intimately about who we are, and particularly intimate in terms of the subtle aspects of our mind. But so that kind of hesitation is actually a bit counterproductive, because if we really think about it, it's much more dangerous to be stuck in samsara. So if we're looking at what's dangerous, then yes, Vajrayana might be subtle. We might need to be, you could say, intuitive in terms of understanding, and we might need to apply ourselves in terms of the path. But the real danger lies in taking rebirth, being confused. So if we end up doing that, then we're just continuing our long journey and our long suffering path in samsara. And it really applies that any path that we practice mistakenly can be dangerous. It's like any medicine. The real danger is samsara. All the various practices that we have, they need to be guided by not just an intellectual or someone who has superficial knowledge, but someone who has genuine wisdom. Practices are referred to here, and these various kind of references here Thinley Norbu gives to the various yogas are given in order to make a connection to the path of enlightenment. The Vajrayana, especially the 6 yogas, they have to be practiced not as a technique that we learn, but it has to be practiced on the basis then of the intuitive aspect of faith. And faith here means much more than we just trust the teacher. It really means that we then have a complete foundation. So the first then applies to the various practices of sadhana, and through the practice of sadhana we attain confidence in our nature as deity. And that is then where we begin to create a you could say more than just aspirational connection to the path of enlightenment. There is some sense of catching on to the implication. And when we now here are referring to the various yogas and so forth, these are quite well known. Nowadays many people engage in yoga, but particularly with regards to the tantric tradition of yoga, then it's essential that the students, that they are students of genuine, authentic lineage masters that have a genuine, authentic lineage, rather than just studying books. Thinley Norbu makes the point how that out of rigid adherence to social equality, some people, they don't want to acknowledge teachers as being objects of honor, reverence, as sublime beings. And rather they would like to see them as just, you could say, professionals whom one visits and receives information from on the basis of some economic exchange. But Vajrayana, especially the 6 yogas that we're going to look at here, they have to be practiced on the basis of faith and experience. And otherwise, these kind of practices will actually be counterproductive, and they'll actually create disturbances. Rinpoche points out how modern people, they have difficulty understanding these practices, and they associate them with familiar substantialist conceptions. They try to understand them in terms of science and psychology and so forth. Modern people also misunderstand some of the Vajrayana deities, thinking that these are gods. They refer to them in terms of like Indian gods or whatever. So the modern persons are very ill-equipped to approaching this subject, and also there's many numerous modern scholarly works that assert, for example, that the Vajrayana deities, they come from Indian traditions and so forth. So in that way, there has to be a little bit of discerning that takes place in approaching the 6 yogas that are going to be introduced here. What needs to be understood is that the objective and the ultimate practice is free from any substantialism, any kind of grasping. And even though substantial phenomena may be used to unveil then the substanceless wisdom body, speech and mind. So the nature, the scope, the reality, the dimension in which we're operating has nothing about it that can be grasped. And yet we use skillfully methods that correspond to wisdom, body, speech and mind in order to introduce this substanceless dimension of wisdom, and you could say the spontaneously presence of this wisdom in terms of its aspect of enlightened body, enlightened speech, and enlightened mind. The 6 yogas, they can be practiced in the transitional states of this life. So these 6 yogas that we're going to discuss, they can be practiced in here and now. And also within these 6 yogas, there are some of them, some of these 6 yogas corresponds to these 6 transitional states. So the practice tradition of the inner Vajrayana can be synthesized in 6 yogas, and they are related, 6 yogas and 6 bardos. The first then that Rinpoche discusses is the yoga of, well, Rinpoche calls it magic form. Sometimes it's also translated as illusory body. And that is then the basis of the path. So the yoga of magic form is to view all appearances as deity and pure realm. So we've established through the middle way that appearances do not truly exist. And in fact, we're trapped in samsara because we believe they do. So this is, you could say, the foundation of the path is actually seeing through this hoax. The practice then of pure magic form here corresponds to the vase initiation, or the vase, or the Rinpoche calls it the vessel initiation. We sometimes say vase empowerment. And this initial aspect of this first of the 4 empowerments corresponds to seeing all inner and outer phenomena as deity and pure realm. When we talk about magic in general, ordinary magic, and here when we say ordinary magic, we shouldn't confuse it with, I think in the Shambhala tradition they speak of ordinary magic, and that's actually referring to the practice of Dharma. But here, Thinley Norbu more refers just to the kind of, David Copperfield sort of magic, and that is deception. It's trickery. So in that sense, it's actually just like our belief in the solidity of appearances. This is also, you could say, trickery. We're deceived. So ordinary magic is deceptive. Our belief in the substantial nature of our perceptions and appearances, that is also deception. So the remedy is to consider all appearances as illusion, and we have then 8 similes. We have a mirage, a dream, an echo, a city of Gandharvas, an illusion, lightning, a bubble, and magic. So we use the pure magic of pure perception to remedy the impure black magic of delusion. This is really just an antidote where we adopt this attitude of illusion in order to simply keep in mind that all our perceptions, they don't really exist as real as they appear to us. So if we look in a mirror, we imagine that the reflection we imagine then the reflection experiencing pain and pleasure alternately, and examine both object and subject. So practitioners, they would actually go and they would first watch their images in a mirror and imagine that the person that's being reflected is subjected to things that are repulsive, painful, and when the experiences seem real, then examining whether there actually is somebody out there. Is there somebody in the mirror? There's not. So we take all our perceptions very seriously, and yet we know we are just like the person in the mirror. And yet the person in the mirror experiences nothing of that kind. So this is of course just, you could say, mind training, but it brings us to lose our ordinary gullible habit of attributing solidity to appearances. And it opens up to this pure magic of deity perception. So we can transfer then the insight that we gain in this kind of exercise to whatever increases our passions and afflictions. When we have that perception of that there is someone there that seems so real and yet there's nothing real about it, then we can also transfer that to our ordinary perceptions, because we normally naively and gullibly just believe in what we perceive as being for real. So as we're always watching empty forms and that they are just like no different from these reflections, we actually begin to loosen our duality, and it opens up then to this, you could say, open quality of our perceptions. And that then enables us to begin to appreciate the nature of deity perception. This practice then we apply when we do sadhana practice, deity practice. And when we do sadhana practice, we apply this understanding that deity is just like anything, not real. But yet, at the same time, we base our confidence in the deity. We have some sense of the deity's quality, sacred quality. And when we then pursue the practice, there's actually three things that we apply, which is clarity of detail. And this is where we visualize. Then we also recollect that the deity is nothing but the display of emptiness, the quality of the Sambhogakaya that arises out of that. And we sustain this pride, which is not competitive pride or usual pride of the ego, but is more, you could say, confidence. And this we refer to as Vajra pride or firm pride. So then, in that way, we have an understanding of the illusory nature of the deity, and yet we pursue this practice in order to purify our ordinary perception of ourselves, our subjectivity, and also the perceptions of the world around us. But in terms of the dimension of ourself as deity, we then have these three aspects of what we call clarity of detail, recollecting the deity's qualities, and firm pride. So, samsaric phenomena, we should reflect how they continually change and bring pain. And the pure phenomena that we're engaging in here, such as visualizing enlightenment, this unveils and increases purity and bliss. So we can choose between the two. We can see habitually we go for one, and that continually dismantles, you could say, destabilizes us through the changes, and it brings us pain. However, the pure phenomena of sadhana, this is something that connects us to this quality of our abiding insight and also bliss. So it stands in juxtaposition to the changes and the pain. So what we're engaging in here is freeing ourselves through the truthless truth of the power or the magic power of deity. So here the skill of deity practice lies in that it uses our habitual pattern of objectification and demand, or you could say subscribing to or habituating ourselves to some truth, when in fact there's nothing that can be grasped. But in that the deity reflects the quality of enlightenment, there's then touching something that is innate to the insubstantial nature of enlightenment and the qualities of enlightenment, the Sambhogakaya and the Niyamanakaya. So this is something we should reflect on, because we might practice visualization and then we might not be certain about what we're doing. So it's important that we consider then how ordinarily we're deluded and how this delusion, how it brings us suffering, and how then conversely the practice of sadhana brings bliss. And so this kind of dimension extracts us from our ordinary narrow realm of our habitual perceptions into a much greater dimension, and Rinpoche refers to this as the pure sky. It's comparable to the vastness of the sky. So that way, if we have this awareness, if we juxtapose the two, the choice, and then we pursue this awareness of the pure magic of sadhana practice, then we can use all our perceptions and all the various continual and unceasing phenomena on the path to enlightenment. Here at the end, Rinpoche says, the benefit of these practices is that one's karmic phenomena becomes less susceptible to samsaric influence through the truthless truth of the magic power of deity. The practitioner's deity phenomena can gradually flourish by cutting the old karmic habit of reality, so fresh deity energy can appear, just as cutting the fading stems and leaves of flowers gives them refreshed energy to blossom. Okay, to see if there's any questions. There's a question here. Somebody says, can you repeat the part about sadhana? I'm not quite sure what that would be. Can you repeat the part about sadhana? Sadhana essentially is Vajrayana practice. So you could say sadhana is a form of vipassana. But it's rather than taking the ordinary mind, you could say as the path where we gradually eliminate ordinary dualistic mind, sadhana operates with the empowerment of Buddha nature as deity and making that into the path. Now then there's a question, why would subtlety of Vajrayana be considered dangerous? Well, for one, Vajrayana empowers us as deity, as existing Buddhas. Now, if someone like me naively is told, oh, you're the Buddha, then I might actually begin to just mistake that and mistake it. And rather than recognize that what is being empowered is the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom of vipassana, the wisdom that doesn't objectify, the wisdom that is non-dual, rather than recognizing that as being empowered, it might just think that my habitual ego, me, is being empowered. And unfortunately, we do actually, in my impure perception, I occasionally see persons that seem to be abusing the Vajrayana in that sense. So the Vajrayana is very subtle without an insight into both the theoretical understanding of emptiness and the middle way, and also some processing on the path of shamatha vipassana. Yes, so in fact, there's a comment then it says, yes, so perhaps dangerous without a wise teacher. Exactly, yeah. Okay, so thank you for your patience, and I apologize for the belated departure here. And for the next time, then read the next third, approximately, until page 181, paragraph 3. So, by this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and increase, ever more and more. Thank you.